architects and urban designers, our work involves designing buildings and spaces which are aesthetically appealing and functional. Now, what concerns us is how this functionality is translated into design. Now, there's two parts to functionality. One is utility, which looks something like this, and second is sensitivity, which looks something like this. Now, this image of a urinal in a female washroom tells us that we have still not arrived at a point in our architectural and urban planning which considers men and women as two distinct users of the space who have separate needs to find utility in a public space.
When it comes to gender inclusion, the debate predominantly becomes about equality and opportunity. In architecture and design, these two rights take the form of access, mobility, and safety. A woman can work at night, but can she walk the street safely at night without having to worry about it? Can she sit in a public bus without worrying that somebody will bother her? Can she wait at a terminal without constantly looking over her shoulder? Can she nurse her child in public areas without worrying about prying eyes?
Now, as architects and urban designers, we've been constantly asking ourselves, where are we going wrong when it comes to the design of our public spaces and our cities? Why is it that cities that are designed for everyone end up excluding some of us? And why, more often than not, that ends up being women?
Globally, there's not a single city that has been designed by women or for women. Even City for All are not truly for all. Now, built spaces are a representation of ideologies, and historically, our design ideologies have accommodated men more than women. And to this date, we are still following those guidelines and implementing them without ever reevaluating them. So the physical aspect of a built space also decides who to include and who to exclude. So how can we design our public spaces in such a way that they're more inclusive and less discriminatory? How can design fix this gap?
So we can fix this gap by designing cities and public spaces which are more accessible and walkable, because women are more dependent on public transport, hence generate more footfall. Designing a women-friendly city is designing a pedestrian-friendly city. Now, if you look at this image, women tend to avoid these narrow pavements so that men don't graze against them. By increasing the width of these pavements, we ensure that these activities are not done, and also we increase the spatial balance in the built environment. We can also fix this by designing women-specific restrooms, which include sanitary disposal units and nursing zones, so that we can change our current design, which does not adapt itself to the women's physical needs.
We fix this by putting more eyes on the street. Women tend to avoid pathways that are poorly lit because they're perfect spots for kidnapping and assault. So when we provide them with clear visual access and proper lighting, we encourage them to participate more in the city and subdue the anxiety about certain areas. We fix this by creating multipurpose public spaces that activates them for maximum hours. When you introduce multiple programs, you introduce multiple groups. And when you have multiple groups congregating and socializing together, you have a shared sense of ownership. This lends a sense of security again to women, and then they're encouraged to spend more time outdoors and not sit at home.
But most importantly, we fix this by ensuring that there's more women representation in leadership roles and as decision makers, because we know that this is how the female voice will be heard and understood. Now, all of these changes might seem trivial, but collectively, they actually influence and help a woman decide to participate in the city or to stay at home.
As women and architects, we have been evaluating our urban context and built space from a dual lens, as a participant and as a designer. Based on our personal and professional experiences, we started to implement these strategies and see how, when applied to our local context and local public spaces, we can reimagine these spaces and redesign these spaces to make them more women-friendly and ensure higher female participation.
Now let's look at a local example. What you see over here is F11 Markaz of Islamabad, one of the most frequented spots of the city. Now, this spot, despite being one of the most frequented spots, is isolated and obsolete. What we're trying to do here is change it and make it more inclusive. Now, this image shows how greenery and hard landscaping and soft landscaping can change that. We can make it inclusive by introducing pedestrianization. We can make it inclusive by increasing the visual access and creating intersections between them. We can make it inclusive by eliminating all of the areas, and also by designing specific pickup and drop-off points for Uber and Careem. Now, all of these changes collectively can encourage a woman to spend more time in these spaces and feel safe and secure.
Again, these solutions are no-brainers and pretty obvious. It's time we stop having this conversation and start implementing them. By 2050, half of Pakistan's population will be female between the age of 25 and 30. This age group is more inclined to populate these public areas. Hence, the need to redesign them is more urgent than we realize. To design a city where a woman's needs are heard, understood, and reflected in its infrastructure, where her sense of ownership is absolute and her voice is heard.
The idea is to act now. We need more women as decision makers and as leaders. The conversation is two-sided between decision makers and designers. To design a feministic city is to create a humanistic one. We need to change the way we design spaces and make it more inclusive. So we see more women occupying our public spaces, and more women, and more women, and more women, until this conversation becomes redundant.
The right to this city, this right to wander it aimlessly, this right to engage with its public spaces, this right to stumble upon lovely little urban parks, this right to be me unapologetically in my city, this right should be everybody's right.
Because this is our city,
and we belong here.